Hello, Speed Demons. It's ya boy Slayer here. So, interesting story. 90% of the way through writing this script, the file got corrupted, basically forcing me to start from scratch. So yeah, this review isn't going to be the way I originally intended. And also, the footage in this review will be split between some that I recorded live from my PS2, and some that was recorded from my emulator. In the case of Ridge Racer Revolution, all footage was recorded from my PS1 emulator. So yeah, there will be some discrepancies between footage here and there. But anyways, let's get into the review. Some game genres reach their creative apex early on. Good example would be the FPS genre, with some of the best shooters of all time being released early on in the genre's life. Other genres take some time before finally getting their footing, with the best releases occurring later on. One genre that certainly fits the latter mold is the racing genre. Early races are kind of a hard sell nowadays unless you're in it for the nostalgia factor alone. And the genre wouldn't become consistently great up until around 1997, when Gran Turismo changed everything. Finally, a racing game with more than 4 hours of content, and with a track count surpassing the single digits and 140 cars, Gran Turismo proved not only that racing games could be nice and meaty and replayable, but could also be genuine art as well. Sure, by no means did GT kill the arcade racer, Need for Speed was also making its rise around the same time, but for the old school style of arcade racers with barely any tracks and cars, such as Daytona USA and Outrun, it was pretty much game over. One of these arcade series that got run over by Granddaddy Turismo in the late 90s was Ridge Racer. Originally released in arcades in 1993, Ridge Racer was eventually turned into the Ps1 Launch Title, as in, the very first game ever released for the system. For some, that's a strong start, but just you wait. Nonetheless, Ridge Racer went on to be a huge smash success, and one of the first games to really sell the PS1 before things really took off with Spyro and Crash Bandicoot. But years later, is Ridge Racer 1 still worth playing? Nope, not at all. And before the 40-year-old neckbeard brigade barges in with their 12 pairs of rose-tinted glasses, let me explain in simple words. Ridge Racer 1 lacks content, even for its time. Most 80s and early 90s racers are kind of a hard sell nowadays with their content, mainly the lack of cars and tracks, with at most 5 tracks to choose from. Good example is Daytona USA, a hugely popular racer from the mid-90s that was quickly discarded later in the decade. One reason? There's only 3 tracks. Now if you thought that was bad, get a hold of good old Ridge Racer over here, which only has 1 track with an extended layout. So depending on how you look at things, this game either has 1 or 2 tracks. I'm not the biggest fan of the original F-Zero if my now disowned review on it is anything to judge by, but at least that game had a whopping 15 tracks, which is amazing by 1992 standards. Even Gran Turismo 1 only had 11 tracks, but what really gets me is how there are legions of people who still perceive Ridge Racer 1 as some untouchable timeless classic when it's only got 1 track, and the car count doesn't fare much better, with only 4 cars to start off with. But if you beat that Galactica minigame in the beginning, you can unlock some extra cars. That being said, there's only really a couple cars that I can recommend, because each one varies in terms of handling, so the more balanced cars are the ones I would go with. But let's put aside the lack of content and judge it by how it plays. It's been over 10 years since I first played this game as a kid, so maybe there's some fun in coming back to Ridge Racer. Ridge Racer is very arcadey by today's standards. The only way it could be any more arcadey is if it had a story about furries racing in go-karts to save the planet from being turned into a parking lot. There's almost no need to brake throughout the game, and cars drive extremely fast. All things considered, this game can be damn fun to play at times. And the 1 track we are given is one of the best tracks in racing game history. This is up there with Grand Valley Speedway and Hot Air Speedway as a contender for the best track in a PS1 racing game, and it features so much diversity in such a small space. Going from a Tokyo-inspired cityscape, to a gorgeous tunnel, to to a tropical beachside, to a small town, to an admittedly average extended section, and back to where we started. And it also features an early example of a day and night cycle as well. It's unrealistic at times, but such a great course. And even though this is never going to happen, I have to wonder what this course would be like in a Gran Turismo game. Sure, you can laugh about the absurdity of that all you want, but I can always dream. But really? One course? As almost perfect as this track is, one course isn't enough, even for 1994 standards. But the lack of content isn't the only thing dated about this game. Ridge Racer 1 is straight out of 1994, so the audio department is antiquated as all hell. Whether it be the coked up game show host who comments on every other thing you do.
Okay, the final lap, hang in there! 3 laps to go. Next corner stop, watch yourself! Okay, it's the last stretch, keep going!
Or the obnoxious techno music that sounds like Alvin and the Chipmunks having sex with a jackhammer. Okay, actually the soundtrack isn't that bad. I just wanted to make the Alvin and the Chipmunks having sex with a jackhammer joke. The rest of the soundtrack is pretty decent early to mid-90s techno, and I do quite dig it. That being said, once the Galaxian minigame is over, you can actually switch out the disc for something else. Basically, yeah, you can play Ridge Racer 1 to death metal if you want to. And honestly, loud, fast metal music kinda fits, to be honest. If only I could switch out that announcer though. Ugh. But after 8 races, 4 regular and 4 in reverse, we are finished with Ridge Racer. To say this game skipped out on dessert would be an understatement. We barely even got a main course to begin with. Yeah, sorry, but I'd take OG F-Zero or Top Gear over this any day of the week. Ridge Racer 1 is a shallow, outdated shell of a game that's been completely outclassed multiple times over. How anyone can say this game still holds up is beyond me. Even for its time, other racers from years before had more to offer. Sure, they didn't have the graphical fidelity, but I'd trade in graphics for content in a heartbeat. Ridge Racer 1 is just one of those games from racing's rough transition to 3D. 3D racers, in my honest opinion, didn't become consistently good until Gran Turismo. Sure, you can scoff at the difficult to master controls all you want to, but in terms of content, Gran Turismo was a watershed moment. And it, along with better arcade racers a la Need for Speed, would effectively kill off games such as Ridge Racer and Daytona USA. I will not be rating Ridge Racer because, for as mediocre as it is nowadays, it was worth playing during the dawn of the PS1 era. So if you want it, either find a really cheap copy for like $3 or emulate it if you can. So originally this review was just going to be on Ridge Racer 1, but because I've forgotten most of the original script, it ended up being shorter than I intended it to be. So we're gonna take a look at Ridge Racer 1.5, Ridge Racer Revolution. Yeah, this is pretty much just an expansion pack to the original Ridge Racer, and a very lazy one at that. All it really adds is a new course with 3 layouts, and surprise, it's actually better than the original course. If this was in a different and, let's be real, much better game, I would race on this track for hours. Just pure catharsis paved into asphalt. A lot of the same types of scenery as the previous track, but more gorgeous and laid out better. But aside from that, it's got the same problems. For one, we've got the exact same set of cars, and once again, you start out with only 4. Really, are we not going to at least try to change things up? You know, maybe start me off with a different set of cars or something? Just try! The game has also seen a noticeable spike in difficulty. whether it be the AI or the occasional tight squeeze on the course, but other than that, Ridge Racer Revolution is really just the same game again. And that's pretty pathetic if you ask me. Instead of being a real revolution, Ridge Racer 1.5 is more of the status quo, a dated, shallow husk of a dying breed of racers. Thankfully, around the turn of the millennium, racing games were finally great across the board. You want some arcade racers? Burnout and Need for Speed have got you covered. Want something realistic? Gran Turismo has that in spades. And for you Xbox players, Forza's got your back. Want a wacky kart racer? Crash Team Racing is a must-play. Ridge Racer did eventually find its footing with Ridge Racer Type 4, which I've actually been playing recently and do quite enjoy, but this series would quickly fade from the public eye during the 2000s. Nowadays, the first Ridge Racer still has some nostalgic following towards it, and is praised for its contributions to the arcade racing genre, but sorry, I'm just not on board with this. I actually had Ridge Racer 1 as a kid on the PS1, but even then, I saw all the flaws in this antiquated arcade racer relic, and if I had $1 for every PS1 racer that's better than Ridge Racer 1, I'd have enough dough to buy a brand new PS5 game, and still have some cash left over for some snacks at the Dollar Tree. Ridge Racer 1 is not a good game, and it's time for those blinded by nostalgia to accept that fact and move on. There are dated games that can still garner some enjoyment, and then there's games not even worth touching nowadays, and Ridge Racer 1 is sadly one of those games. At least it does fare better than the faux expansion that is Ridge Racer Regurgitation, but still, I'd skip both these games if I were you.